I remember the sound before anything else, the soft crackle of candle flames, the hush that falls when people are afraid to say the wrong thing. It was my 70th birthday, and the house smelled of buttercream and coffee. My son, Daniel, stood at the head of the table with a look that didn't fit the celebration. Everyone waited for him to start the song, but he only stared at me, holding an envelope. He said quietly, "Mom, before you blow the candles, you should read this." I smiled, thinking it was one of his sentimental gestures. He'd always been the thoughtful one, careful with words, sometimes too careful. But there was something different in his eyes that night, something tight and uncertain. Around us, the children shifted, their voices whispering through the silence like wind through grass. My daughter-in-law, Clara, stood beside him, her hand resting on his arm, her nails painted the same red as the roses on the cake. "Go on, Mom," she said softly. Her tone was warm enough, but it carried a tremor that made my stomach twist. I took the envelope. It was heavy, sealed with wax the color of wine. The tablecloth beneath my hands felt rough. My fingers shook a little. I told myself it was age, not fear. "You'll make me cry in front of everyone," I joked, but no one laughed. When I opened it, I didn't see a card or a photograph. It was a letter typed, formal, printed on the kind of paper lawyers use. My eyes caught the first line, "Notice of transfer of ownership." My heart stumbled. The words swam before me, and I had to blink several times before I could read the next sentence. It said that the house I'd lived in for 45 years, the house Daniel grew up in, where my husband built the porch with his own hands, had been sold. And that my signature, dated 2 weeks ago, authorized the sale. I looked up. "What is this?" My voice came out smaller than I intended. Daniel's lips parted, but he said nothing. Clara took a slow breath, her eyes glistening with a mix of guilt and something else, relief, perhaps. "We needed to take care of things, Mom," she said. "It's all arranged. You'll move into a nice apartment. No more chores, no more worries." I tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. The room tilted. The light seemed too bright. "I never signed this," I managed to whisper. Daniel looked down. "You did, Mom. Don't you remember? Clara helped you. It was the day after your doctor's visit." My mind searched for that day, the doctor, the drive, the cup of coffee I'd spilled on my blouse. I remembered Clara insisting I rest, the papers she'd asked me to sign for the insurance renewal. The pen had been blue. I had trusted her. The air in the room thickened. I could hear the clock ticking behind me, steady and merciless. Around the table, the children fidgeted. Someone coughed. I wanted to reach for Daniel's hand, but he stood rigid, his jaw set, as if bracing for something inevitable. "I don't understand," I said again. Why would she?" Clara stepped forward. "You need to be practical, Mother. The house is too much for you. Daniel and I have plans. This way, we can take care of you properly." Her words were gentle, but the meaning behind them was sharp as glass. My world shrank to the space between her painted smile and my trembling hands. The candles flickered, throwing shadows across her face. For a moment, she looked like a stranger wearing someone I used to love. The cake's scent turned sickly sweet. I felt my knees weaken, but I forced myself to stay upright. "You sold my home," I whispered, without asking me. Clara sighed, almost pitying. "We didn't want to upset you. It's done now." Daniel finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's for the best, Mom." I looked at my son, the boy who once brought me wildflowers, who cried when he lost his first tooth and I couldn't recognize him. The envelope in my hand felt heavier by the second. The candles had melted halfway down, wax spilling onto the table like tears. "I see," I said quietly, and for the first time in my life, I felt truly old. I folded the letter, slid it back into the envelope, and placed it beside the cake. "Then let's finish the song," I told them. My voice surprised me with its steadiness. Clara hesitated. "Are you sure?" "Yes," I said. "Let's not keep the candles waiting." They began to sing softly, awkwardly, like people singing at a funeral instead of a birthday. I smiled through it, pretending not to notice Daniel's eyes darting toward Clara, seeking her approval. When the song ended, I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and blew out the flames. In the darkness that followed, the smoke curled upward, pale and ghost-like. I thought of my husband's hands, of the way he used to say, "A house is more than walls. It's where the soul learns to breathe." I kept smiling, even as my heart cracked open in silence. Because they didn't know what I knew, what I had kept locked away for decades. And as I watched the smoke fade, I thought, there was something she didn't know. When I was a young woman, mornings in our house began with the sound of the kettle and the smell of sea salt drifting through the open window. The sea was only 2 streets away, and when the tide was high, the waves seemed to hum against the walls like a secret heartbeat. My husband, Robert, used to say the ocean kept us honest, always coming back, no matter how far it wandered. We bought this house when Daniel was 3. It had peeling paint, a porch that groaned under its own weight, and a kitchen window that faced east, catching the first light of every morning. We couldn't afford much then, but we had laughter, and a kind of faith that made broken things feel temporary. Robert built our dining table out of pine boards, salvaged from an old shed. He carved our initials underneath R, and man told me, someday, when we're gone, this table will remember us. I used to make coffee while Daniel ran in circles around the kitchen, chasing the cat or asking endless questions. "Why does the sea move, Mama?" he'd ask. I'd say, "Because it's alive, just like us." And he'd nod, satisfied with the kind of certainty only a child can hold. Our home was small, but it had stories in its walls. There was the time Robert slipped and spilled paint all over the porch, turning it into what he called our accidental masterpiece. Or the stormy night when Daniel woke crying and we found a leak dripping right onto his toy truck. Robert fixed it the next morning, humming off-key, his hair damp from the rain. Those were the days that stitched my heart quietly to this place. When Robert passed, I thought the house would fall silent. It didn't. The floorboards still creaked where he used to stand. The garden still grew the tomatoes he planted the year before. I talked to him sometimes while I washed the dishes, as if he were sitting just beyond the window. "The beans are late this year," I'd tell him. "You always said to plant early." Daniel stayed with me for a while after the funeral. He was kind, gentle, but his eyes were already elsewhere, on his new job, his new apartment, and the young woman he'd met at the office, Clara. The first time she came over, she brought a pie that looked perfect, too perfect, as if it belonged in a magazine. She had that polished calm that makes you wonder what lies beneath. Still, I was polite. She called me mother too soon, but I didn't correct her. I told myself Daniel needed love, and if she could give it, then I would find space in my heart for her. They married within the year. It was a small ceremony, simple, modern, efficient. Clara wore white, of course, but her eyes kept flicking to her phone between the photos. When the vows were spoken, Robert's absence hit me harder than I expected. The sea breeze that morning carried the scent of salt and rain, and I felt, for the first time, the faintest chill of being left behind. After the wedding, they visited less often. Daniel called every Sunday, his voice warm but distracted. "Clara's been busy," he'd say. "Work's been heavy." I learned to fill the quiet with small things, tending the roses, sewing, volunteering at the library. The house stayed my anchor. Every nail, every stain on the wall, every creak of the door told me I still belonged somewhere. Then came the day Clara suggested I downsize. She said it casually over coffee, stirring sugar into her cup without looking at me. "You'd be happier somewhere smaller, Mother. Less work, fewer worries." "I like the work," I told her. "It keeps me strong." She smiled, that soft, polished smile that never reached her eyes. "Of course, but you're not getting younger." Something in her tone made me fold my hands tightly. "Neither are you," I said gently. It was the first time I saw a flicker of irritation cross her face. After that, her visits became less frequent but more purposeful. She'd appear with folders, brochures, or small gifts that always seemed to suggest I needed help. Once, she brought me a pamphlet for a retirement village. "Just to look at," she said. I tucked it into a drawer and never opened it again. Sometimes, I'd find her wandering the house while Daniel fixed something in the shed. She'd trail her fingers over the furniture, glance at the framed photographs on the walls. "So much history here," she once murmured. "It must be exhausting to carry it all." I remember thinking that she saw my memories as clutter. Still, I kept my peace. I had learned that real love sometimes meant staying silent long enough for others to reveal who they truly were. The last memory I have of Robert came to me one evening as I sat on the porch, watching the sea darken under the fading sun. His voice, or maybe just the echo of it, whispered through my mind, Don't let the wrong hearts live inside these walls. At the time, I thought he meant to protect me from loneliness. Now, I wonder if he was warning me of something else, something that was already beginning to grow behind polite smiles and folded papers. Because love can make us blind. And blindness, I would soon learn, can cost us everything we think we own. The morning after my birthday, the house was quieter than it had ever been. The balloons hung limp, the confetti stuck to the floor where the children had danced. I stood at the sink, washing teacups that no one had touched, when I saw the envelope again, the one Daniel had given me before the candles went out. It sat on the table, the wax seal cracked, the paper slightly curled from where my hands had trembled. I told myself not to look at it again. What was done was done. Yet, every few minutes, my eyes drifted back to it, as if the letter itself were breathing in the stillness. Around 10 o'clock, the phone rang. It was Mr. Lang, my husband's old lawyer. His voice was as measured as ever, steady, but with a kind of respectful gravity. "Mrs. Holloway," he said, "I came across something yesterday while reviewing Robert's estate files. I believe it belongs to you." I frowned. "That was nearly 15 years ago, Mr. Lang." "Yes," he said, "but I think you'll find this relevant. Would you be able to come by the office this afternoon?" When I arrived, his secretary offered me tea, which I declined. The office hadn't changed in years. Same oak shelves, same ticking clock, same faint smell of dust and tobacco. Mr. Lang gestured for me to sit. He opened a drawer and pulled out a small folder tied with a faded blue ribbon. "Your husband prepared an addendum to his will," he said. "It was never filed officially. He gave it to me with instructions to hold it privately, to be released only if you requested a full review of property ownership." I blinked, unsure what to say. "And why are you giving it to me now?" He leaned back. "Because your son's wife came here 2 weeks ago. She asked for property documents, said she was helping you with the sale. She was persuasive." He paused. I sensed something wasn't right. When I checked the signature on the deed, I knew it wasn't yours. I felt the air leave my lungs. "You're certain?" "As certain as I can be. Robert's file reminded me he left instructions regarding this house." He untied the ribbon and placed a thin document on the desk. The paper was yellowed, the handwriting firm and familiar. My husband's handwriting. It read, "If, at any time, the property known as 14 Seaview Lane is to be transferred, it shall remain under the name of my wife, Margaret Holloway, for her lifetime. Upon her passing, ownership may be reviewed by the surviving family under her consent only." Underneath, his signature, dated 3 months before his death. I touched the paper as if it were his hand. "He never told me about this," I whispered. Mr. Lang smiled faintly. "He wanted you to have peace, not paperwork." Then, after a pause, "Do you want to pursue legal action?" I stared out the window at the narrow street, where the leaves turned in the wind. For a moment, I saw Clara's face in my mind, calm, poised, certain of her victory. "Not yet," I said softly. "Not yet." He nodded, understanding more than I said. "Then at least take this," he said, handing me a manila envelope. "It contains proof of your ownership, the original deed, the will, and a copy of the forged signature." When I got home, I locked the envelope in the old cedar chest at the foot of my bed, the one where Robert used to keep our family photos. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, tracing the pattern on the quilt. The house seemed to listen with me. That evening, Daniel called. "Mom," he said, "Clara's found an apartment for you near the river. It's small but nice." I closed my eyes. "Daniel," I said quietly, "do you know what she did?" He hesitated. "She only wants what's best for you." "What's best for me," I said, "was built with your father's hands. It has his name under the porch paint. It holds your first laugh, your first steps." He sighed. "Mom, please don't make this harder." I almost told him everything right then about the forgery, about the will, about what Mr. Lang had found, but something inside me stopped. I realized, suddenly, that he was as much a victim as I was. Clara had wrapped him in silk and guilt, made him believe love meant obedience. So I said only, "I understand," and hung up. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee. The steam rose and curled like memory. On the wall above me hung an old photograph, Robert in his work clothes, holding baby Daniel against his chest, both laughing at something unseen. I won't let them take what you built, I whispered. Then I opened a small notebook, the one where I kept every bill, repair cost, and note since Robert's passing, and began to write dates, names, signatures. I underlined each in red ink. Because I knew something now. Sometimes the only way to reclaim what's yours is to let the betrayer believe they've won. And while Clara thought she had taken my home, she hadn't yet realized she had only awakened the part of me that had built it in the first place. The next morning, I woke before the sun. The sky was still gray, the kind of color that makes everything look unfinished. I made coffee, the way Robert liked it strong. No sugar, and sat by the window watching the sea mist roll in from the dunes. For the first time in years, I felt the faint tremor of purpose in my chest. I knew I couldn't confront Clara yet. I needed time, and time favors those who move quietly. That week, I began my act. When Daniel and Clara came to visit, I wore a cardigan too thin for the weather and let my hands tremble slightly as I poured the tea. Clara looked pleased, as if weakness confirmed her righteousness. "You see, Daniel," she said, "she needs care. That apartment will be perfect for her." I smiled at her. "You're right, dear. I've been thinking the same." Her eyes widened, then softened into triumph. "That's wonderful, Mother. We can start moving things next week." I nodded, folding my napkin slowly. "Of course. Just let me sort through a few old papers first." That evening, when they left, I locked the door and went straight to the cedar chest. I pulled out Robert's documents, the deed, and the forged papers. I studied every mark, every signature. Clara's hand was steady, careful. She'd practiced. But she'd missed one thing: the notary's seal was from the wrong county. The next day, I went into town. I wore my old blue coat and carried a small shopping bag so I'd look like any other elderly woman running errands. I stopped by the bank first. Mr. Lang had told me to speak with a woman named Judith, the branch manager. She greeted me kindly. "Mrs. Holloway, how can I help you today?" "I'd like to check the status of a property account," I said. "It was recently transferred." Her fingers moved across the keyboard, and her expression shifted. "Ah, yes. It appears the ownership transfer was processed under your authorization. Could you print that document for me?" I asked. She hesitated, then leaned closer. "Mrs. Holloway, between us your signature looks off. If you'd like, we can place a temporary hold on any further transactions." I met her gaze. "Do that," quietly. When I stepped outside, the sea breeze felt sharper, cleaner. The sky had opened, and light fell across the harbor roofs like truth finally breaking through cloud. I spent the next few weeks visiting old contacts, quietly: Robert's accountant, the county clerk, even the contractor who'd once repaired our roof. I asked small questions, nothing alarming. By the end of the month, I knew exactly how Clara had forged the sale. She'd used my doctor's receptionist as a witness, told her I had difficulty holding a pen, and presented false medical paperwork, claiming I was suffering from mild memory loss. That night, I sat at the dining table, the same one Robert had built, and opened my notebook again. I added one more page: "They underestimate silence." I began to live in two worlds. By day, I let Clara think she had won. I agreed with her plans, nodded through her monologues about simplifying life. By night, I gathered proof photocopies, emails, statements. I kept them all in a plain biscuit tin labeled tea bags. Once, Clara stopped by unexpectedly while I was sorting papers. I closed the tin just in time. She eyed it. "Still keeping your little treasures?" she asked lightly. I smiled. "Old habits die hard." She laughed, but I saw a flicker of unease in her eyes. Somewhere, deep down, she knew I was not as frail as she wanted me to be. Daniel remained distant, caught in the net she had woven. He'd call on weekends, his voice gentle but tired. "Clara's been under pressure," he'd say. "She worries about you." "I'm sure she does," I'd reply, stirring my tea. "Tell her I appreciate it." Sometimes, after those calls, I'd find myself talking to Robert again, his photograph on the mantel. "You'd laugh if you saw me now," I'd whisper. "Your old Maggie, playing chess while they think I'm asleep." And in a way, I could almost hear him chuckle in the wind that rattled the porch. 2 months passed before I returned to Mr. Lang's office. I carried the biscuit tin with me. When I placed it on his desk and opened it, he raised his eyebrows. "You've been busy," he said. "I've been paying attention," I replied. "And now, I'm ready." We spent the next hour reviewing everything: the false documents, the forged signatures, the receipts Clara had hidden under my name. When we finished, he leaned back and gave me a long, slow look. "You could take them to court," he said. "You'd win easily." I shook my head. "No, not yet. I don't want to destroy them. I want them to understand." He studied me for a moment, then smiled softly. "You remind me of your husband." "Good," I said. "He always believed in lessons, not punishments." As I left his office, the sun was setting over the water. The sky was painted in gold and rust, the kind of light that makes you remember everything you've lost and everything you still have. I paused, breathing it in. The sea breeze carried the faint scent of salt and jasmine from the old garden back home. I knew the time would come when Clara's world would begin to shake, when the walls she'd built on deceit would crumble under their own weight. And when that moment arrived, I would be ready not with anger, but with truth, because sometimes the quietest heart holds the loudest storm. And mine was just beginning to gather. It was late autumn when she came back. The leaves along Seaview Lane had turned the color of rusted copper, and the air smelled faintly of rain and salt. I was sitting on the porch, a blanket over my knees, watching the sea breathe in slow gray waves, when I saw a small car pull into the drive. Clara stepped out. Even from a distance, I could see something had changed. Her hair was unbrushed, her posture bent slightly forward, as if the world had been pressing down on her. She carried a large handbag, the kind that once would have been designer, but its edges were frayed. "Mother," she called softly. For a moment, I said nothing. I let the sea fill the silence between us. Then I replied, "You shouldn't call me that, Clara. You sold the title with the house, didn't you?" Her lips trembled. "Please, I need to talk." I looked at her long enough for her to understand that this would not be easy. Still, I rose slowly, letting her see how age had not made me weak, only deliberate. "Then talk," I said. Inside, she stood in the hallway like a stranger. She glanced around at the furniture, the framed photographs, the worn rouge-everything she had once called outdated. I noticed how her eyes lingered on the biscuit tin on the shelf, as if it still held power. "Where's Daniel?" I asked. She looked down. "He's gone. The business failed. He left 2 months ago. We've been evicted from the flat." Her voice cracked, and for the first time, I saw a different kind of fear in her own that came not from arrogance, but from loss. I said quietly, "Sit down." She hesitated, then obeyed. The kitchen table between us seemed smaller than before. I poured her a cup of coffee. When I pushed it toward her, our fingers brushed for a second cold, reluctant contact. "I didn't know where else to go," she said. "I thought maybe you could—" She stopped herself. "Help you?" I finished for her. "Yes." I watched her take a sip of coffee. Her hands were shaking. Once, she would never have allowed herself to tremble in front of me. "What happened to the money from the sale?" I asked. She gave a small, bitter laugh. "It's gone. The man who promised us a new business disappeared. The accounts were in my name. Daniel blames me. Maybe he's right." I leaned back in my chair. "When you took this house from me, you believed it was a transaction. But this place isn't just wood and nails. It has memory, and memory doesn't transfer with paper." Tears welled in her eyes. "I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought we could build a new life." "And did you?" She didn't answer. The kettle hissed softly in the background, the sound filling the silence like an old friend reminding us of simpler times. I got up to pour more water into the pot, letting her sit there in her guilt. I wasn't angry anymore. Not truly. There's a point beyond anger, a kind of stillness, where you see people exactly as they are. When I returned to the table, I placed a small key beside her cup. "This opens the shed," I said. "You can stay there for a few nights if you need to. There's a bed and a heater, nothing more." She looked up, startled. "You'd let me stay here?" "I'm not cruel, Clara. Just not blind anymore." She covered her face with her hands and began to cry. Not the polite, practiced tears she used to shed in front of Daniel, but raw, uneven sobs that came from somewhere deep and real. I waited, silent. When she finally looked at me again, her eyes were red. "I don't deserve your kindness." "No," I said softly, "but kindness isn't given because it's deserved." She nodded, unable to speak. She rose from the chair, clutching the key as if it might vanish. At the door, she turned back. "Thank you," she whispered. I simply nodded. After she left, I sat alone again. The house seemed to breathe differently now, as if it knew a familiar ghost had returned. I looked out the window at the old truck in the driveway, the one Robert used to drive to the market every Saturday. It hadn't run in years, but I kept it clean. Its paint was faded, but it still held his scent of oil and pine soap. That night, I watched the light from the shed flicker through the rain. I imagined her sitting on the narrow bed, trying to sleep with the sound of the sea pressing against the walls. I wondered what she saw in the darkness, regret, maybe, or the faint shape of her own reflection in everything she had tried to erase. I didn't sleep much. Near dawn, I made another pot of coffee and carried 2 cups outside. The ground was wet, and the air smelled of rain and rosemary. When I reached the shed, the door was ajar. Clara sat on the bed, wrapped in a blanket, eyes hollow but calm. I handed her a cup. She took it with both hands. "Why are you being kind to me?" she asked again. I smiled faintly. Because once, someone was kind to me when I didn't deserve it. Robert believed that mercy changes people faster than punishment. She nodded, staring into her coffee. "You can stay a few days," I said. "Then we'll talk." She exhaled slowly, a sound somewhere between relief and shame. As I turned to leave, I caught my reflection in the small window of the shed. The morning light touched my face, silver in my hair, lines of age soft but certain. For the first time in months, I felt something that wasn't pain or anger. It was power, quiet, patient, forgiving power. And I thought, she believes this is refuge. But what she doesn't know is that refuge is only the beginning of her lesson. The days that followed were quiet, like a held breath. Clara stayed in the shed, emerging only to use the kitchen in the early mornings when she thought I was still asleep. But I always heard her, the hesitant creak of the back door, the faint clatter of dishes, the whisper of running water. Guilt has a sound, I've learned. It moves softly, as if afraid to be seen. I didn't ask her questions, and she didn't offer explanations. We lived in a fragile rhythm, 2 ghosts moving through the same memory. I tended to the garden, trimmed the roses, and fed the stray cat that slept under the porch. Sometimes I'd glance toward the shed and see her shadow in the window still, hunched, thinking. One afternoon, I found her sitting on the back steps, her hands folded in her lap. She looked thinner, paler. "There's not much food left," she said quietly. "I can go into town and get some things." I nodded. "Take the old truck. The keys are in the drawer." Her eyes widened slightly. "Does it still run?" "It does, if you know how to listen to it," I said. Robert used to say old engines just need to be spoken to kindly. She smiled faintly, the first real smile I'd seen on her face in years. It reminded me of the girl Daniel once fell in love with, bright, unguarded human. She drove away slowly, the truck coughing down the road. When she returned an hour later, her hair was windblown, her cheeks flushed. She carried a small bag of groceries, rice, eggs, milk, coffee. She placed them on the counter as if laying an offering. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For trusting me." "Even with something as small as this." I looked at her. "Trust isn't a gift, Clara. It's a seed. It grows only if you tend it." That night, I heard her crying again. I didn't go to her. Some pain needs to echo before it softens. Weeks passed. She found small jobs around town, cleaning, mending clothes, even serving coffee at the diner by the pier. I saw her once through the window when I stopped in for lunch. She was wiping tables, her hair tied back, her smile tired but real. When our eyes met, she froze. I gave her a nod, small, acknowledging, then left a tip under my cup and walked out. That evening, she returned home early. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "Do what?" "Leave that much money." "It wasn't money," I replied. "It was respect. You're earning your place again." She looked down, her throat tightening. "I'm trying." "I know." There was a quiet honesty in the air then, a tenderness neither of us expected. For the first time since she arrived, she seemed lighter, as if her shame was losing its grip. But truth, like the tide, always returns. One morning, a letter arrived, addressed to me but written in Daniel's hand. The envelope was thin, the ink hurried. I carried it to the porch, sat in the light, and opened it. "Mom," it began. I don't know if Clara's there. If she is, please tell her I'm sorry. I couldn't handle the fallout, the debts, the accusations. I've gone to work up north. I'll make things right. Somehow. Love, Daniel. I folded the letter and slipped it into my pocket. Later, when Clara came in from hanging the laundry, I handed it to her. She read it once, twice, then pressed it to her chest. He still blames me, she whispered. Maybe, I said, but maybe he also blames himself. It's easier than forgiving. Tears slipped down her cheeks, silent and clean. She didn't wipe them away. That night, I found her sitting outside, staring at the stars. The air smelled of salt and jasmine again, like the night Robert proposed to me so many years ago. I sat beside her, and for a while, we said nothing. Then she spoke softly. Do you think people can change? Really change? I took a slow breath. People don't change all at once. They soften, they learn to listen. The heart cracks open, and what spills out is who they truly were all along. She nodded. Then maybe I'm finally cracking. I smiled, the faintest curve of my lips. Good. That's where the light comes in. A gust of wind swept through the garden, carrying the smell of wet earth and the far-off sea. Somewhere in the distance, a bell from the harbor rang. I thought of Robert again, his voice, his laughter, the way he always believed that life's cruel lessons were just disguised forms of grace. The next morning, Clara left early for work. I found the coffee pot warm, a single cup waiting for me. Beside it, a note in her handwriting. Thank you for letting me begin again. I read it twice, folded it gently, and tucked it into my notebook beside the first forged deed. 2 pages of her life, one built on deceit, the other on redemption. I smiled to myself. The scales were beginning to balance. The mornings grew slower that autumn. The light lingered longer over the hills, soft and gold, touching everything like a quiet apology. The house felt warmer somehow, not because of the sun, but because silence no longer weighed the same. It wasn't heavy anymore, it was gentle, companionable. Clara still worked at the diner by the pier. Some evenings she'd bring home leftover bread or a small carton of soup for me. She never said much about her days, but I could tell they were humbling. There was a stillness about her that hadn't been there before, a kind of listening, the kind that comes only when life has stripped away every illusion of pride. I started taking walks into town again. It had been years since I'd gone further than the church or the market. The sidewalks felt familiar but distant, like faces in an old photograph. The bookstore still smelled of dust and coffee. The tailor still played his radio too loud. And near the pier, the old fisherman, Mr. Lee, still sat on his overturned bucket, mending nets with hands as wrinkled as parchment. When he saw me, he nodded. Haven't seen you in a while, May. It's been some time, I said. He smiled faintly. You've still got that look, someone who carries a story too heavy for her pocket. I laughed softly. Maybe. But I've learned not to keep stones in my coat. He chuckled, his eyes kind. Good. They sink you faster than the sea ever could. We talked for a while about the weather, the fishing, the town's gossip. Before I left, he handed me a small shell, smooth and white. For luck, he said. Or for remembering. I slipped it into my coat pocket, next to the folded note from Clara. That night, I set it on the windowsill. When the moonlight hit it, it glowed faintly like a whisper from the ocean saying, "You're still here." Clara came home late that night. I heard the truck pull in, the door close, the soft scrape of her shoes on the porch. She peeked into the kitchen where I was still reading. "You're up," she said. "I was waiting for the kettle to sing," I replied. "Would you like some tea?" She hesitated, then nodded. We sat together in silence, watching the steam curl like little ghosts between us. "Mrs. Henson came by the diner today," she said quietly. "She remembered you. Said you used to bring Daniel there for hot cocoa when he was little." I smiled at the memory. He'd always spill it down his front. I used to think he'd never learn to drink without wearing half the cup. Clara laughed, the sound light and young. "He still can't. When we were together, I used to tease him for it." We fell into a gentle rhythm of remembering. Not the pain, not the betrayal, just the small human moments that still belonged to us. As the weeks passed, she began volunteering at the church pantry. Every Thursday, she'd pack boxes of canned food and bread for the families who came by. One day, I went along to help. The building smelled of coffee and floor polish. and the air hummed with soft chatter and gratitude. A young mother thanked Clara for the bag she handed her. "You don't know what this means to us," the woman said, her eyes wet. Clara shook her head. "I do," she whispered. "I really do." Later, as we walked home, she said quietly, "It feels strange, doing good when I've done so much wrong." I looked at her. That's when it means the most. When kindness grows out of the ruins, that's when it becomes sacred. She stopped walking, her eyes glistening. "Do you really believe I can change?" "I don't believe it," I said softly. "I see it." The days settled into a tender rhythm. Mornings with coffee and newspaper, afternoons spent tending the garden, evenings with soft music and tea. Sometimes the cat curled at Clara's feet while she read old magazines aloud. The house, once hollow with resentment, was breathing again. One Sunday, after service, Mrs. Reynolds, the pastor's wife, approached me. "May," she said, "you've looked lighter lately. There's peace in your face." I smiled. Maybe peace doesn't come when life stops hurting. Maybe it comes when you stop running from it. That night, as I sat on the porch, I watched the lights from the harbor shimmer on the water. The sound of the waves blended with the faint hum of crickets. I thought about the year show many of them had been spent trying to fix what wasn't mine to fix, how many had been wasted waiting for apologies that could never undo what was done. But life has its own balance. Where there had once been betrayal, there was now quiet redemption. Where there had been lies, there was learning. Inside, I heard Clara humming softly to herself as she washed the dishes. I leaned back in my chair, feeling the sea breeze brush against my cheek like a benediction. For the first time in a long while, I felt something that had been missing for years, Faith. Not in people, but in the simple rhythm of life, in the way wounds close without being forgotten, in the way forgiveness doesn't erase, but transforms. The kettle hissed in the kitchen. The house glowed faintly in the lamplight, old but alive. I whispered a quiet thank you to Robert, to the sea, to whatever invisible hands had guided me here. Humanity, I thought, isn't about being right. It's about being kind after you've been wronged. And as the night deepened, I knew we were both still learning. It was a Tuesday morning when the first crack appeared not in the walls of the house, but in the quiet we'd both built. I remember the light that day, a thin, pale sunlight that couldn't quite warm the air. I was in the kitchen when the mail arrived, a stack of bills, a church newsletter, and one thick envelope with Daniel's handwriting on it. The sight of his script made my heart catch. It had been months since his last letter. I waited until Clara came home from the diner before opening it. We sat at the table with 2 cups of coffee, the steam rising between us like a fragile curtain. I unfolded the letter and began to read aloud. "Mom," it said, "I'm coming back next week. I've found some work here in town and I think I'm ready to face things. I hope Clara's all right. There's something I need to discuss with both of you about the house and the papers." The word papers snagged in my mind. I looked up slowly. Clara's face had gone pale. "What papers, Clara?" I asked quietly. She swallowed hard. "I don't know exactly. He mentioned them before he left. I thought he meant the business records." I didn't press her. But that night, long after she'd gone to bed, I took out my old file box from the study and spread the documents across the table. The original deed, the forged one, the legal letters. Everything was as it should be until I saw it. A small, unfamiliar folder tucked behind the others, marked in Daniel's handwriting, "Power of Attorney." My breath caught. I opened it. Inside was a form, dated 2 years, Ago transferring full financial authority over my estate to my son. The signature at the bottom was mine, but I hadn't signed it. The next morning, I drove to the notary's office in town. Mrs. Patel, who had handled my will years earlier, greeted me with her usual warmth. But when I showed her the document, her expression changed. "May," she said carefully, "this is not your signature. I can see that right away. But it was filed under your name at the county clerk's office." I felt something cold settle in my chest. "Filed? Officially?" She nodded. "Yes, and since it's active, any property decisions your son makes could be binding." I thanked her and drove home slowly, the tires humming against the road like an old prayer. Clara was on the porch when I arrived, folding laundry. She looked up and froze when she saw the folder in my hand. "You knew," I said softly. Tears welled in her eyes. "Not everything. I thought he'd withdrawn it before he left. He said it was just temporary, that it was for your protection." "Protection," I repeated, the word bitter on my tongue. "Do you realize what this means, Clara? He could sell this house." "I swear, I didn't know he actually filed it." Her voice cracked. "I was part of the lie, I know that, but I thought I'd stopped it." I turned away, staring at the sea beyond the garden fence. The water was still, too still. That evening, I called my lawyer, Mr. Harlow. He was a patient man, older than Daniel, with a soft voice that could calm even the most tangled heart. "May," he said after reviewing the documents, "we'll need to act quickly. I can file a motion to revoke the power, but if your son's already made transactions, things could get complicated." "Complicated," I said, almost to myself. That's one word for it. Over the next few days, the air in the house grew heavy again. Clara spoke little, her movements small and careful, as if afraid to touch the world too hard. I caught her once in the kitchen, holding one of Robert's old photographs, the one of him laughing in front of the truck, and she whispered, "I ruined everything he built." I wanted to tell her she was wrong, but even forgiveness has to walk through truth before it can breathe. When Daniel arrived that weekend, the tension broke like a storm. He looked older, worn, his shoulders hunched from years of running from himself. Clara stood at the doorway, wringing her hands. "Mom," he began, "I need to explain." "No," I said gently. "You need to listen." I laid the folder on the table. "I know about the power of attorney. I know about the filing. I know you forged my name." His face went pale. Mom, it wasn't supposed to be like that. I was desperate. The debts? The business, Clara thought. "Don't bring her into this," I interrupted quietly. "She's already living with the weight of it." He rubbed his temples, trembling. "I thought I could fix it before you found out. I was going to return everything." "The truth doesn't return, Daniel," I said softly. "It waits." We stood in silence for a long time. The only sound was the ticking of the clock, steady as a heartbeat. Finally, he looked up, tears in his eyes. "What do you want me to do?" "I want you to make it right," I said. "Not for me, for yourself. Go to Mr. Harlow. Tell him everything. And this time, use your own name." He nodded slowly, defeated but sincere. "I will." That night, when he and Clara had gone to bed, I sat on the porch, the letter still on the table beside me. The sea breeze was cool, carrying the faint scent of rain. For the first time in months, I felt tired, not angry, not broken, just deeply human. The truth had cracked the shell of our fragile peace, but maybe that was necessary. Maybe peace built on silence was never meant to last. As the wind rustled the roses and the stars trembled above the dark water, I whispered, "Let it all come to light." And somewhere deep inside, I believed it would. 3 days after that stormy evening, Daniel called to say he'd gone to see Mr. Harlow. His voice was quieter than I remembered, humbled, almost reverent. "He told me everything can be corrected," he said, "but it'll take time. And a lot of honesty." "Then start there," I told him. That morning, the house was still. The sea outside was gray and patient, the kind of weather that asks you to think rather than to move. I sat at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee cooling in my hands, staring at the photograph of Robert on the wall. He used to say life never fixes itself in a single moment, it bends slowly, like light through water. By noon, Daniel's truck pulled into the driveway. Clara followed him out, her face drawn but determined. When they entered the house, I saw something different in both of them, a shared exhaustion that looked a lot like surrender. Daniel sat across from me. "Mr. Harlow filed the revocation," he said, voice steady but low. "The forged document is null now. He's also contacting the county to make sure no sales or transfers can happen under my name again." I nodded. "That's a start." He hesitated, then placed a small envelope on the table. "There's something else," he said. "It's a confession letter. For the record, I told Harlow I want it filed with the documents, so if anything ever happens to me, the truth stays clean." For a long moment, I couldn't speak. Then I said quietly, "You did the right thing." He nodded, eyes glistening. I wish that meant more now. I reached across the table, placed my hand over his. "It does. It always does, even if it comes late." Clara stood behind him, silent, her gaze fixed on the floor. I could feel her guilt humming in the air like static. "Mom," Daniel said softly. She tried to stop me. I didn't listen. She shook her head. Don't protect me. I was part of it. I thought we could fix our lives without asking for help. I was wrong. I looked at them both, my son and the woman who had once shattered my peace, and I felt something loosen in my chest. The anger that had been coiled inside me for years finally exhaled. We've all been wrong, I said. The difference is what we do next. The room fell quiet. Outside, a breeze lifted the curtains, carrying with it the faint smell of the sea and the sound of a gull crying somewhere in the distance. After lunch, Daniel went into town to meet Mr. Harlow again, leaving Clara and me alone. She began cleaning the dishes, her movements quick, restless. I watched her for a moment, then said, "Sit down." She obeyed, folding her hands in her lap like a child. "Do you love him?" I asked. Her eyes widened. "Daniel?" "Yes." She swallowed hard. "I did. Maybe I still do. But it's not the same kind of love anymore. It's full of regret." "Regret," I said slowly, "is just love that's lost its way home. Help it find its way back, in whatever form you can." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "How? After everything?" "Start small," I said. "Tell the truth. Not to me, to yourself." Later that afternoon, the sky opened into rain. I stood at the window, watching the droplets blur the garden. The roses bent but didn't break. The sound was soft, rhythmic, cleansing. When Daniel returned, he was soaked through, but his eyes were clear. "It's done," he said simply. Harlow filed the correction. "The house is safe, Mom." I nodded, relief and sorrow mixing in my chest. "Thank you." He hesitated, then looked around the room. "I know I can't stay here. Not yet. I need to find work, rebuild." "Where will you go?" He smiled faintly. "There's a construction company out by the docks. They're hiring. It's hard work, but maybe that's what I need." I felt tears rise but didn't let them fall. "Then go. Build something honest this time." He hugged me before he left. It was awkward at first, then deep and wordless. When he stepped back, he looked at Clara. They exchanged a long glance full of history, pain, and something unspoken. "Take care of her," he told me. "I intend to," I said. That evening, Clara and I sat on the porch again. The rain had stopped, and the air smelled clean. She handed me a cup of coffee, her small ritual of peace. "I don't know what happens next," she said. "Neither do I replied. "But I know the truth doesn't ruin us. It remakes us." She nodded, her voice trembling. "I want to help you, if you'll let me. I don't want to hide anymore." I smiled, the kind of smile that comes from deep, weary grace. "Then stay. Not as a burden, as a person learning to live." We sat in silence, the horizon burning orange as the sun dipped behind the sea. The world felt fragile again, but not in a way that frightened me. Fragile like glass catching the last light of day. Inside, on the kitchen table, the envelope Daniel had left remained unopened. Later that night, I would read it and find the words that would turn this fragile piece into something unshakable. But for now, I let the wind speak. The roses moved gently in the dark, and the sea whispered its endless rhythm, breaking, retreating, returning, always returning. I waited until the moon was high before I opened Daniel's envelope. The house was asleep, Clara in the spare room, the cat curled near the window, the clock ticking its soft, patient rhythm. The air smelled faintly of rain, and the jasmine blooming by the porch. I sat at the kitchen table with a single lamp burning, its light a golden pool against the dark. My hands trembled a little as I unsealed it. Inside was a folded letter and a smaller, yellowed envelope. On the back of the smaller one, Daniel had written, "For when you're ready." I set it aside and began reading the letter. "Mom," it began, "I don't know how to start, except to say I'm sorry not just for the paper I forged, but for every silence that came before it. You trusted me, and I broke that trust long before the ink dried. I used your name to cover my shame. But there's something you don't know, the debt wasn't all mine." I stopped reading for a moment. The night seemed to tighten around me. Clara tried to stop me. She told me the night before that it would destroy everything. I didn't listen. When the bank came for answers, she took the blame so I wouldn't be arrested. She lost her job, her friends, her dignity, all because she tried to protect me. I let everyone think she was the villain because it was easier than facing what I'd done. She never told you the truth because she thought it would make things worse for me. I felt my throat close. My eyes blurred as the words wavered on the page. When you found out about the forgery, I wanted to come clean, but she begged me to let her carry it, said she owed me that much for marrying into the family. She thought it would bring you and me back together if she took the fall. It didn't. It just broke her. I covered my mouth, tears slipping silently down my cheeks. I remembered all the cold years between us, the suspicion, the distance, the hurt, and through it all, Clara's silence. The way she'd looked at me, not with anger, but with a quiet kind of grief. Mom, the letter continued, you once told me that forgiveness isn't about forgetting what people have done, but remembering who they still are. I'm asking you to remember her. I can't fix what I did, but maybe you can save what's left of her. Please don't let my mistake be the only story she has left. The letter ended with a simple line, shaky but true. I love you. I just forgot how to show it. I set the paper down and breathed deeply. The lamp flickered, and for a moment, the room seemed filled with both their ghosts, not the dead, but the haunted living. After a long silence, I reached for the smaller envelope. For when you're ready. I opened it slowly. Inside was an old photograph, Daniel and Clara on their wedding day. Robert stood beside them, his arm around me. I was laughing, caught mid-motion, hair lifted by the breeze. On the back, Daniel had written, "For what we once were, and for what we can still become." I pressed the photo to my chest and closed my eyes. The years folded over themselves, the laughter, the betrayal, the quiet mornings of rebuilding, every sorrow, every small grace. I didn't realize Clara was awake until I heard her voice from the hallway. "You read it," she said softly. I turned. She stood there in her robe, her hair loose, her eyes red but calm. "Yes," I whispered. "I did." She hesitated. "Then you know." "I know," I said, and the words came out like a release. "I know everything." She walked toward me slowly, her hands trembling. I never meant for it to go that far. I thought I was protecting him. I thought I was protecting you from losing him. And in the process, I said gently, you both lost yourselves. She nodded, tears spilling freely now. "I've wanted to tell you every day since I came back, but I was afraid you'd see me as nothing but my mistakes." I stood and crossed the small space between us. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I took her hand, small, roughened by work, trembling like a child's. "I see you," I said quietly, "not as what you've done, but as who you are now. The woman who came back, who worked, who faced what others would have buried. That's the truth I choose to keep." She broke then, not dramatically, but with a soft, exhausted sob, the kind that comes from a soul finally allowed to rest. I held her for a long time, feeling her heart beat against mine, the years of bitterness dissolving in the space between breaths. When she finally stepped back, her face was wet but peaceful. "He loves you, you know," she whispered. "Daniel. He talks about you all the time when we speak." "I know," I said, "and I love him too. It just took us a lifetime to learn what love actually means." We stood there until the lamp burned low. The house, for all its age and cracks, felt like it was breathing again, fuller, lighter. Outside, the sea was a dark mirror, endless and calm. I thought of Robert, of how he used to say that storms only teach the shoreline how to endure. And as the first light of dawn began to silver the horizon, I realized something simple, something I'd forgotten. Love doesn't erase truth, it redeems it. The morning after the truth came out, the air felt lighter, as if the sea breeze itself had decided to forgive. I brewed 2 cups of coffee, one for Clara and one for myself, just as I used to for Robert and me. The smell filled the kitchen strong, familiar, grounding. We sat across from each other at the same wooden table that had witnessed every argument, every silence, every fragile beginning again. Neither of us said much at first. Words felt small compared to what had already been shared. Outside, the gulls cried over the cliffs, and the tide rolled in slow and patient. I looked at Clara, her eyes rimmed with the weariness of too many years spent carrying someone else's burden. "What will you do now?" I asked quietly. She turned the mug in her hands, watching the steam curl. "Start over, I suppose. Maybe go back to the old library. They're looking for part-time help. It's not much, but I miss the quiet." I smiled. The quiet can be healing, if you let it. She nodded, then looked up. And you? What about this house, this place? You could sell it and live somewhere easier. I glanced around the room, the faded curtains, the chipped blue plates, the photograph of Robert and me on our wedding day. I think I'll stay, I said, but not to keep the past alive. To give it somewhere to rest. In the days that followed, the rhythm of life began to settle again, but differently this time, simpler, slower. Clara took the job at the library. I began volunteering at the small community shelter by the pier, the one where people came to warm their hands and find company in their loneliness. It felt right to be there, among those who carried quiet heartbreaks of their own. One afternoon, I met a woman named Lila, perhaps in her 30s, who came in every day with her little boy. She rarely spoke, but one evening she told me she'd left her husband because he gambled away their savings. As she spoke, I saw in her eyes the same mix of shame and fear that once lived in mine. I offered her a cup of tea and said softly, "You'll rebuild, one kind act at a time. That's how I did it." Her eyes filled with tears. "Did it work?" she asked. "Eventually," I said. "It always does, if you let love be larger than your wounds." That night, I walked home beneath the soft drizzle, the lamps glowing against the mist. When I reached the gate, I saw Clara sitting on the porch, waiting. In her hands was an old silver key, the one to Robert's truck. "I found this in the drawer," she said. "I thought maybe we could get it running again." I took the key from her palm and smiled. "That truck hasn't moved in 20 years. "Maybe it's time," she said. We spent the next few weekends together, cleaning, fixing, laughing more than we had in years. The truck coughed and sputtered, but one bright morning, it finally came alive, an old, familiar rumble that felt like a heartbeat returning. We drove down the coastal road, windows open, wind in our hair. The sea glittered beside us, endless and forgiving. Clara looked out at the horizon and whispered, "He'd be proud of you, you know." I smiled, keeping my eyes on the road. "Of us, Clara. He'd be proud of us." Later that week, a letter arrived from Daniel. It was brief, but it carried a gentleness I hadn't felt from him in years. "I've been clean for 6 months. I'm working at a small repair shop up north. Clara told me everything. Thank you for forgiving us before we even asked." I read it aloud to Clara, and for a long while, neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. The silence between us had changed. It wasn't a wound anymore. It was peace. As the months passed, our lives became stitched with small rituals, watering the garden, sharing supper, reading by the fire. We built something new, not on the ruins of what was lost, but on the soil of what had been learned. One evening, I took the old photograph of Daniel and Clara from the mantel and placed it beside a newer one, both of them smiling again, their faces lined with life, but lighter somehow. Next to them I set a simple frame that held a quote I'd once found scribbled in Robert's handwriting. "Love doesn't demand perfection, it asks for courage." Sometimes, when the sea wind carries the scent of salt and jasmine through the open window, I close my eyes and imagine Robert sitting beside me, watching the horizon fade into gold. I think he'd be proud not because we found a perfect ending, but because we chose to keep living after the storm. That night, Clara came into the living room holding 2 cups of tea. She handed me one and said, "You know, for the first time in years I feel like I belong somewhere again." I looked at her. This woman who had once been my daughter-in-law, then my adversary, and now something gentler, my friend. "You always did," I said softly. "You just needed time to see it." The kettle hissed in the background, and the house, our house, seemed to hum with quiet contentment. I knew there would still be shadows, moments of doubt, memories that stung. But for the first time in a long time, they no longer frightened me. They simply reminded me that we had survived. And that survival, quiet, dignified, forgiving, was its own kind of rebirth. The sea is calm tonight. The sky, a soft lavender gray, folds gently over the horizon like an old shawl. From the porch, I can hear the slow rhythm of the waves, the steady heartbeat of this place that has witnessed every version of me, the wife, the mother, the woman who broke and began again. It's evening now, the golden kind that makes everything tender. Clara is in the kitchen, humming softly while she washes the dishes. The radio plays an old song, something from the 70s that Robert used to sing off-key when he thought no one was listening. I smile at the memory. The air smells faintly of rain and rosemary. I planted some by the steps last spring, and it's grown wild and fragrant. The house feels different these days. Not emptier, lighter. There's laughter here again, the kind that doesn't hide pain but carries it gently. On the mantel, the two photographs sit side by side, one from the past, one from now. Between them, the small silver key rests polished, ordinary, eternal. I keep it there as a reminder, some things unlock, not doors, but hearts. I take my cup of tea and step out to the porch. The chair creaks softly beneath me as I sit. The sea breeze brushes against my face, cool and salt-sweet. I close my eyes and breathe it in. Sometimes, when the evening light touches the waves just right, I imagine I can see Robert's old truck driving along the shore, its headlights blinking faintly in the dusk. I like to think he's still with us, not as a ghost, but as a quiet blessing. Daniel writes to me now. Every Sunday. His words are humbler, lighter. He talks about fixing engines, about learning patience, about how sometimes oil and forgiveness feel the same between your hands, messy, but healing. He and Clara are not together again, but they speak kindly, like two people who finally understand the shape of their past. That's enough for me. The other day, I told Clara I wanted to start a small fund at the shelter for women trying to rebuild their lives. Nothing grand, just enough to help someone begin again. She offered to help organize the paperwork. "We can call it the Lighthouse Fund," she suggested. "A light for those who've lost their way." I liked that. A light, not a rescue. That's the difference I've learned. We can't save others from their storms, but we can be a place of warmth when they wash ashore. As the sky deepens into indigo, I think about all that has passed, the lies, the letters, the years of silence, and the long road back to love. It would be easy to say forgiveness healed everything, but that's not quite true. Forgiveness didn't erase the pain. It taught me how to hold it without letting it harden me. Once, I believed strength meant endurance, keeping my back straight, my voice calm, my heart locked away. Now I know strength is the opposite. It's softness that survives the storm. It's letting your voice tremble when you tell the truth. It's opening your heart even when it's been broken before. A small light flickers on the horizon, a fishing boat returning home. I watch it for a long time, tracing its steady path through the darkening sea. Somewhere inside, I feel the same quiet return, the journey from grief to grace. Clara steps outside and joins me on the porch. She wraps a shawl around her shoulders and sits beside me, silent. The stars begin to appear, one by one, shy but certain. "It's beautiful tonight," she says softly. "It is," I reply. "The kind of beauty you only notice after you've lost enough to see clearly." She leans her head against my shoulder, and for a long time, we say nothing more. The sound of the waves fills the silence, and I realize this is peace. Not the loud kind with promises and declarations, but the quiet one that comes when everything unnecessary has fallen away. Before we go inside, I whisper a small prayer, not for myself, not even for them, but for everyone still standing at the edge of their own storm, afraid to move forward. May they know that forgiveness isn't weakness. May they learn that endings are often beginnings in disguise. And may they one day sit, as I do now, beneath a forgiving sky, remembering that love, when it's real, always finds its way home. The kettle whistles faintly inside. Clara stands and offers her hand. "Come on," she says, smiling through the dusk. Before the tea gets cold, I take her hand and rise slowly. The porch light hums above us, warm and steady. As we step inside, I glance once more toward the sea, the vast, patient witness to all our stories, and quietly, with a heart both heavy and light, I whisper, "True wealth is dignity and love. Did you like my story? And which city are you listening from?" Leave a comment, let's meet in the comments. If you like this story, subscribe and share it with someone who believes in second chances.